You suddenly notice a warm sensation spreading, not a sudden gush, not dramatic, just a slow flow that you cannot fully control. No pain, no warning, and that is exactly what makes you hesitate, because it is too mild to feel dangerous, yet different enough that it cannot be ignored. And in that exact moment you are caught between two thoughts. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it will stop, maybe you're overthinking. But what you are feeling is not determined by how strong or weak it is, but by whether something inside has changed or not. At first it is inconsistent. It stops, then comes back, more noticeable when you stand up, when you move, when gravity shifts, and this inconsistency is what makes it confusing, because your brain tries to match it with familiar things, discharge, bladder pressure, something temporary, something harmless, but your body is not asking you to identify a sensation. It is asking you to identify a state, and there are only two possibilities. The system is still closed or it has started to open. The issue is not the sensation, but the structure, because during pregnancy the baby is surrounded by the amniotic sac, a closed fluid-filled environment that functions like a hydraulic system. This fluid distributes pressure evenly, so when the uterus contracts, the force is absorbed and spread out instead of being focused on one point, protecting the baby from direct pressure and preventing the cervix from opening too early. In that stable state, contractions do not push the baby directly downward. They are softened, distributed, controlled, but when the amniotic membrane ruptures, even with a small tear, the system changes immediately. Fluid begins to escape, pressure is no longer evenly distributed, and the protective cushion between the baby and the cervix starts to decrease. This is not just leakage, it is a mechanical shift, because as fluid volume decreases, the baby's head begins to descend, no longer floating freely, but making more direct contact with the cervix, and each contraction, even those you barely feel, becomes more focused, more intense at a single point. The baby's head begins to act like a biological piston, converting uterine contractions into direct pressure on the cervix. And this repeated pressure gradually opens the cervix, not instantly, not dramatically, but step by step, contraction by contraction. The system shifts from a cushioning state to a direct load-bearing state. If you start to feel heaviness in your pelvis or increasing pressure when you stand or move, it may not seem alarming, but it is a sign of this transition. Something small externally may reflect a clear internal change because the system is no longer functioning the same way. But mechanics are only part of it. At the same time, a deeper biological feedback loop begins to activate when the baby's head applies pressure to the cervix. Stretch receptors send signals through the nervous system to the brain, specifically the hypothalamus. And in response, the brain releases oxytocin into the bloodstream. Oxytocin returns to the uterus and strengthens contractions. Stronger contractions create more pressure on the cervix, sending signals back to the brain, forming a feedback loop known as the Ferguson Reflex. This is how the body organizes labor, turning separate events into a coordinated process. At the same time, the hormonal environment is changing. Prostaglandins increase to soften and dilate the cervix. The balance between progesterone and estrogen shifts, making the uterus more responsive to oxytocin. All of these factors combine, mechanical pressure, neural signaling, hormonal regulation, forming a system moving in one direction. But this system is highly sensitive. Your neurological state also affects it. When you are anxious, adrenaline increases, and adrenaline reduces the effectiveness of oxytocin. It does not stop the process, but it makes contractions less coordinated, less efficient. So calmness is not just emotional, it is a biological factor influencing progression. At the same time, another change occurs that you cannot directly feel. When the amniotic membrane is no longer intact, the protective barrier between the uterus and the external environment is no longer completely sealed. This does not create immediate danger, but it changes the conditions. Bacteria are no longer fully blocked, and over time the internal environment can shift. Amniotic fluid continues to be produced and leak out, creating a gentle outward flow that helps limit external intrusion, but this is not the same as a closed system, and that difference becomes more important over time. The same sensation does not mean the same condition. One case may simply be normal discharge, the system still closed and stable, while another may look identical externally but be a sign that the membrane has ruptured. the system has shifted to a different state, and this difference is not always something you can feel. No pain does not mean no change, and a small leak does not mean a small change, because when the membrane is no longer intact, even partially, what is changing is not the sensation you perceive, but how force and pressure are being transmitted directly to the cervix. If fluid appears once and stops, it may not be rupture, but if it continues, if it returns, if it creates a constant sense of wetness you cannot control, especially when it increases with movement, that pattern is the important signal. If after 30 to 60 minutes you are still unsure, that uncertainty itself is already a signal, not for panic but for checking, because the system may have already changed. If the fluid changes colour, becomes cloudy, green, or has an unusual smell, that is no longer something to monitor at home. It needs to be checked. And if contractions begin to form a pattern, or pressure gradually increases, the body may have entered a more active phase. And if hours pass without clear progression, that also matters, because once the system has opened, time begins to influence the next steps. This is not a random event. Your body is either maintaining a stable closed system, or it has begun shifting into a dynamic process governed by a different biological pattern, and both follow precise rules. Your body is not lacking signals. It is communicating in a quieter, more structural, less dramatic way than you might expect, and understanding that difference is how you respond at the right time. Because when the membrane ruptures, what matters is not the sensation, but that the system is no longer closed. And once that seal is broken, even partially, the process has already begun to change. Recognize the pattern, pay attention to what repeats, and when a pattern begins to repeat in the same way, under the same conditions, it is no longer a possibility, it is a sign that a state has formed. And when that state has formed, it does not wait for you to be more certain. It continues according to its own rules. That means continuing to wait will not help you understand more, it will only make you slower than what your body is already signaling. If you are still unsure, that is not a reason to hold back, it is a reason to check. Because in situations like this, timing is always more important than absolute certainty.